the creator economy, it's not just an entertainment thing. The creator economy is taking over everything. We have almost 1,500 episodes of TV caliber content, which puts us in a different category than most creators in terms of library value. We're giant on Facebook, we're giant on TikTok, we're giant on YouTube. In this market, you have to meet audiences where they are. We've just been very blessed that brand deals have been completely unnecessary from an economic perspective. Dhar, understandably, was like, I just don't want to do, like, if you walked around our set, like, hey, turn this coffee shop in town square to a Starbucks this week, and then 2 weeks later, turn it to a Dunkin' Donuts. For most CMOs, they will be facing over the next 5-10 years, multiple challenger brands powered by creators. And in most cases, they will basically probably be the brand that gave them the knowledge to know how to defeat them. If you don't fail 20% of the time, you are not trying hard enough.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Creator Ops Podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Schreiber. The goal of this podcast is to educate you on becoming a great operator in the creator economy. On today's episode, I sit down with Sean Atkins, the CEO of Dhar Mann Studios. Sean and I explore how one of the world's largest creator-led studios is shaping the future of digital content. Before joining Dhar Mann Studios, Sean built an impressive track record leading some of the world's most recognizable media brands. He's the former president of MTV, chief digital officer at Discovery, and most recently served as president at Jellysmack, helping scale creator businesses globally. Dhar Mann is the #1 digitally scripted content creator in the world, reaching over 130 million followers across platforms. In 2024, he was named #2 on Forbes' top creator list. His team produces 5 original 25-minute scripted episodes every week, all filmed inside a 100,000 square foot studio in Burbank, California, with more than 150 employees. In total, Dhar Mann Studios have generated over 10 billion views and nearly 2 billion hours watched on YouTube alone. In our conversation, Sean and I get into their partnership with Samsung and how they brought Dhar Mann content to connected TV. Sean breaks down what it's like working with CAA and what creators should know before signing with an agency. We talk about rethinking brand deals, why Dhar Mann avoided them early on, how they're approaching them now, and the rise of equity-based partnerships like Ryan Trahan's Joyride. Then we go behind the scenes into running a 100,000 square foot studio, how they manage costs, track performance, and keep creativity scalable. And finally, Sean shares powerful lessons on leadership, focus, and scaling creator companies without losing culture. And now, without further delay, here's my conversation with Sean Atkins. We're going to dive into the various revenue streams the studio has, but I'd love to start with the deal you guys did with Samsung. Will you just explain that structure of the deal and a little bit behind why you did it?
Yeah, so Samsung is one of the biggest players if you're talking about fast TV and over the top. And so, we as a company look pretty significantly for partners we can work with. We can have long-term, deep relationships that are more than just like a transaction. And so we had the blessing of meeting the Samsung team via our CAA relationship and really kind of came to understand what their vision was in terms of how they really wanted to build channels, how they wanted to work with premier creators and really act like they were more media partners. Then you bring in the heft of our library, right? We have almost 1,500 episodes of TV caliber content, which puts us in a different category than most creators in terms of library value. And so ultimately, the conversation became from Samsung, like, how do we go deep and long term so we can do a multi-year deal to bring our content exclusively onto their FAST platform and be able to program this unique 24-hour library for their audience? Because the way we think about the business is that we're on every digital platform as it is, right? We're giant on Facebook, we're giant on TikTok, we're giant on YouTube. And in this market, you have to meet audiences where they are versus in the old traditional TV, demand that they come visit you where you are, right? And so being on television in the living room is an important decision for us because particularly since we make TV caliber content, and the majority of our consumption, even if you look on YouTube, is on a television screen. So this is just continuing the availability of putting that content onto the television screen to allow those families to sit down and sit back and have a lean back experience of having Dhar Mann content programmed to them. So that's really what brought the two of us together.
And do you have plans, Sean, to expand beyond just Samsung, get with more programs like LG, or is that more of like an exclusive thing? Is it, and you don't have to dive into the actual details, but how do you think about connected TV beyond Samsung potentially?
Yeah, so I think that, it's an interesting question because the connected TV business now is really kind of narrowing down to like 3 players, right? It's sort of, as I always tell people, it's like every media trend becomes the previous media trend that was before, right? There were three big broadcast networks. There are basically three big fast channel providers, right? And so what I don't have the crystal ball answer to is the answer over time, full distribution on every platform. Is it the players are going to play for full exclusivity? Are they going to sub-license to one another? I suspect the answer is a mix of all of those, right? I think that you'll see some channels that'll have completely exclusive relationships. Some of those channels where they'll be, freely distributed, and then some of those channels where over time, and you see this sort of was in the cable model, right? The distributors have valuable channels they want to distribute to the other ones, and so they go and partner, right? So you can imagine that some of the Roku channels someday end up distributed over on Amazon, and some of the Amazon channels end up distributed on Samsung. I would expect that to play out. Not because I have any insight, just because that is literally what has happened every time previously. And so I expect what the trends are historically to continue in this new environment.
You mentioned CAA, and I'm curious on how you view legacy agencies like CAA. I know you've talked about that on LinkedIn in the past, but tell me about the thought process of partnering with CAA and kind of what they bring to the table for you guys.
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously we think highly of CAA and our CAA relationship, or we wouldn't be with them. And, I have a background having worked with CAA via one of their divisions in the past. And a lot of the agents there I've known for most of my career. So I have great relationships with them. Part of our thought process was when talking to the different agencies is that when you're even at our scale, we're still a small company in the grand scheme of things, right? And so it's not possible to be great at everything simultaneously or explore every business opportunity or have the relationships to open up every door. And that's what an agency can really do for you, right? Like CAA has been able to open the Samsung relationship, right? Because they have a lot of clients who do fast deals. They help us on our brand deal part of the business, right? So we were in Cannes with them on multiple panels going out together. We, explored helped us explore what we're going to do in the live space together. And so otherwise, the trade-off if you're a creator is like, do I want to build a live team? Do I want to build a brand sales team? And the answer to some of those, depending on where you are and what you're doing, is yes. But building all of those, exploring all those opportunities can be an expensive scale opportunity. And so the opportunity to work with someone like CA who has talent relationships and brand relationships and public speaking relationships is to allow us to sort of expand our footprint of available opportunities without having to sort of economically invest behind it. So you sort of get the best of both worlds. You get huge exposure and big opportunities. And also it helps, we have great agents with, Brent and David and Greg, who are all on our team, and Uni, who's on our podcast team, for example, is that it gives us a lot of brain partners, right? Seasons, like I can call someone who like, hey, we're thinking about launching a podcast. Should I launch it in October or September? Like, well, we have 200 clients who've done it and like never launched in October. Good to know, right? You get those sort of advantage. So also the ability just to pick up a phone and call an expert who's done a lot of deals and has a lot of relations is a super helpful thing for creators. Now, it's not for everyone, right? Like, just like you can be an actor and not have an agent, or you can be a director and just have a manager. It sort of depends on how you want to build your business. I've always, in my career, mostly had an agent relationships of some sort. When I was a producer, I did. When I was an executive, I had strong relationships, and it's the same thing here.
And I think it's a great point too about the need for expertise. I just had made a post about this a couple days ago about more creators hiring CEOs, COOs, but then also when you have that internal team also looking for outside expertise, like you're saying at CAA, whether it's your agent, whether it's someone who's done it before, especially as you dive into a new vertical, whether that be podcasting, live TV, live events, that need for really solid expertise that's trusted, that you value their opinion is really key. What advice would you give to a creator who's at that stage where they're thinking about hiring an agency or an agent in some capacity? How do you vet them? What kind of things do you look for?
The first thing you want to vet them for is, do they sort of get your business, right? Because at the end of the day, an agent relationship is a personal business, is a personal relationship, right? Like, you'll talk to them on weekends and evenings. And so you have to make sure that the kind of click personally and with the group that's supporting you, that they get your business, they're passionate about your business. The other thing is you have to sort of understand how the agency world works and sort of where you sit in their echelon, right? Like at the end of the day, part of the reason it's economically viable is that they get a percentage of the revenue that you generate. That's great from a cost perspective. The challenge for that can be is there's an incentive challenge, right? And the incentive challenge is that because they make a percentage, they're incentivized to pay attention to larger deals or their larger clients. right? So if you're a little baby creator or a baby production company or baby actor, you probably need to go and if you luckily land with someone like amazing like CAA, you should probably have the understanding that they're going to pay a lot of great quality attention to you. But are you going to get the same amount of like opportunities that Tom Cruise is going to get? Probably not.
Yeah.
Right. So, what I've seen go wrong is like, and particularly when people are young or not young in age, but young in having an agency relationship, is they have a tendency to think like, oh, I'm the most important thing in the building. And it's not that you're not super important, but you are one of many beloved children. So like they don't not love any of their children, but they do have to pay attention sort of in the scale. And so I always say to people, like, if you're not generating your agent commissions, I don't know how happy they are.
Yeah.
Right?
Two-sided thing for sure.
Like if you're not generating them revenue, you can't be mad that they're not generating you revenue, right? Because essentially it's like, well, I'm mad that you're not working really, really hard for free for a very long period of time. And so, and by the way, that's a delicate balance for both the agent and the talent, because you go through ebbs and flows in your career. So I always tell people, it's like, have a rational and fair perspective of that for both sides of the equation. It's important. Just like if I was talking to my agent friend, I said, like, just because someone's not working for the first 3 months doesn't mean you should like neglect them. So it's just a balance to be aware of in those sort of dynamics. When, by the way, that's not even an agent thing. In any relationship where it's just commission based, that's
for sure.
Have to keep in mind.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder too that it is a two-sided thing. I think I've talked to other creators in the past where that same thing happens. Why aren't you generating me money? But the creator isn't maybe pulling their weight as well. They're not sending over the potential leads, the potential brands, and the agent just at some point they can't keep working for free for that many hours. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, by the way, and sometimes it's a time fit, sometimes it's a time and market, sometimes it's an opportunity. Like I was always like, be careful on trying to lay blame on these things because they're complicated issues. And again, for getting an agent relationship, which obviously I'm a huge proponent of, you just have to know what both of you are strong at and how do you succeed in that. And so that's the most important thing. And by the way, in any relationship that you're building with any sort of partners, like what are they strong at versus what I do? What is everybody's incentives? How do we think about making sure those incentives are aligned to kind of get to the right thing? By the way, there is no perfect incentive system, right? Like whether you're doing employee incentive systems or, JV incentive systems, there's always some flaw in it. So this is not like a new issue if you're talking about agents versus clients, or you're talking about your real estate agent and your house. Like they're all sort of complicated compensation issues.
Do you think, Sean, at some point you guys would get to the point where you would want to bring something like brand deals in-house, or one of those components that CAA was maybe working on, bring it in-house? Is that something you would see maybe down the road in 5-6 years?
Yeah, I think that's one of those classic, it depends, right? So like rarely do you end up with one or the other. You generally end up with a both, right? So let's just say that you're hugely successful at brand deals. It's not so much that I'm going to take it in-house because I want to get rid of my agency. That's not really the calculus. It becomes more like, oh my God, the scale is so much. We're so effective. I actually need to start building some infrastructure because of the success, not despite the success, if that makes sense. And then also the economics have to get to a point where it can make more sense, right? So that's with any business where you outsource it, is like you're always keeping some eye to the balance. Like, by the way, if I was outsourcing, let's say, all of my thumbnail design, just for example, at some point, if I'm like, oh my God, I'm spending, $500,000 a year on thumbnails and I could hire 2 people to do it for 200 grand, you'll do that calculus. And so there's a little bit of like the reward trade-off. But then on the inverse, there's just as much things where you're like, yeah, but like the complications or risk of that are just too much, right? Like, so like, I don't know anybody, let's say in live touring, that's like, I'm going to bring booking in-house, right? Because there's such a specialized expertise and there's scale range, and like, so you can sort of quote, get some cost efficiencies for lack of a better descriptor, but like the operational overhead is just not worth it, right? So it's not just like a straight cash thing. It's a sort of expertise trade-off. And so most people I know, including me over my career, if you've gotten the expertise, it's more an additive conversation than a subtractive, right? Because particularly once you get to large scale, where your advantages come is that an agency like a CAA can do is, right? Like, CAA is like representing like huge athletes, for example. So if you were like a creator, like a Jesser or Dude Perfect, for example, that was doing sports stuff, like even if you had a fully in-house brand team, the chance that you were sort of going to sit down and go direct with the NFL and Tom Brady is pretty low, right? That's the way most people should, and we do think about it. Rarely are you thinking like creators aren't generally, well, in my experience, aren't thinking like, how do I get rid of my agency? It's more like, how do I supplement what's great and then scale it so from an infrastructure it's more efficient.
And historically, you guys have done really few brand deals, but that obviously is changing. Tell me what your criteria is for working with a brand and just how you're now approaching the brand deals. You've made a lot of posts about this in the past. You've talked about this in the past, just communicating with more CMOs, communicating with more agencies that have that ad spend. Tell me how you approach that, because it's, again, very, very nuanced, and there's a lot of dynamics, but maybe why did you guys not start with a lot of brand deals and how that's kind of evolving?
Yeah, one of the things that makes Dhar different, the business wasn't actually built to be a business. He and his wife had found a successful business on their own. As he tells his sort of life story, he had a lot of failures, career, personal, relationship, financial, and, rebuilt his life from what anybody would have said, like, there's no way you can recover from this kind of stuff. And so he's got that great kind of hero's journey story. And, his feeling was that when he was successfully built a business with Laura, the co-founder of the company, was that like there was sort of a mission to, how do I help? There's got to be more people like me who think their whole life is over. They screwed everything up. They failed their family. They failed their friends. Like, there's no possible way they can ever be successful again. And sure, to show them like, look, you can be in the darkest, lowest point in your life and you can make it up. So it was all started from a mission orientation. And so there was no economic incentive behind what he was doing, right? And after a year of sort of experimenting and talking to camera, doing stuff, he sort of found the format that became what today is scripted, right? And it just exploded. If you go back into like when content was on internet, like the 2018, 2019 was a really negative time. And so like having somebody who just made positive aspirational content really sort of hit a deep human need at the right time. So the business exploded. He was the #1 creator in 2020 on Facebook, and by 2021 was the #2 creator on YouTube. And so just programmatically, because of his exposure, it was a very profitable business. And so he never had to go through the cycle like a typical creator is like, I want to be a creator. I start to do some stuff. I get my first brand deal, which allows me to pay to make something better. So most creators, about 30 to 50% of their business is actually brand deals, or the business doesn't work. We've just been very blessed that brand deals have been completely unnecessary from an economic perspective. And then because we have this huge plant with, high volume and high views, Dhar, understandably from a brand and audience perspective, was like, I just don't want to do like, if you walked around our set, like, hey, turn this coffee shop in town square to a Starbucks this week. And then 2 weeks later, turn it to a Dunkin' Donuts. This would be really inauthentic and really fit for our audience. So we made it a strategic intention, like we're sort of building that division while we're building the business and focusing on other business opportunities. And we say about midpoint last year, we started to have conversations with CMOs and agencies that were a lot more strategic. Like, hey, the world is moving towards where paid isn't as effective anymore, where earned isn't effective anymore. And I want to move from like just basically temporary renting someone's audience from buying spots and dots. Like, how do I sort of co-own or get really deep with the community and really move past, creator is commodity, right? Like Dhar always says this thing. It's like, nobody calls LeBron James and says, want to drink a Coke for one game. No, nobody, right? Because you want a deep, true, personal dynamic where, that works. And so we started having conversations with CMOs who were looking for a similar dynamic and access to the talent at a different level, right? Because if you think of the value chain right now, like CMO comes with an idea, it goes to their staff, it goes to their agencies. By the time it gets to like a Dhar, it's like, can you put a Coke in a video for 50? Right? Versus where the CMO is like, I'm trying to figure out how to make original content and be part of the story and be immersed in culture, reactive. And so all that stuff is possible with these, with large stage creators, but the conversations aren't being had and they're just starting to have direct. So we went to Cannes and had a lot of great face-to-face conversations with CMOs. And those range from things like who've seen our facilities, like, oh my God, can you help me build a facility like that over years so that ultimately, instead of renting audiences, I own audiences? Yeah, we're one of the few creators who could do something like that. Could I do a multi-year relationship with you where, I have several brands that I could do one brand in a quarter, the next brand another? Yes. Could I do something is on the nose, is like, I just want to be incorporated in, like, I want to take over your storefronts and turn them into a Target, right? And I just want to be, every time they shop, they're at a Target. Yeah. So they're starting to realize that creators like of our scale, we're looking at a Mark Rober or ourselves, that you can really go very deep and get what creators do best, which is they just want to make great content that keeps their audience engaged and feels authentic. And so if you're a brand, you'd rather be sitting across the table from Dhar and be like, this is what I'm struggling with. This is my pain. This is what I want to achieve. And know that what's going to happen is like, even if the first thing we do doesn't work, just like we do in our normal business, we're like,
iterate,
move fast, try another thing. So that's the change I see happening. And part of the reason I see that happening is not only because media is not as effective and they know that creators have better access, but I think the other reason it's happening is that every business at some point gets disrupted by digital. And I'm one of those people who believes that when you talk about the creator economy, it's not just an entertainment thing. Like creator economy is taking over everything, right? So for example, I know a lawyer, for example, who's a huge, very successful lawyer, has a very successful YouTube and Facebook channel, like hugely profitable. But that channel, which makes like millions of dollars, pales in comparison to the revenue it generates for their core business, right? Which generated them like tens and tens of millions of dollars of revenue. Because essentially what you perceive as entertainment is lead generation.
Yeah, totally.
So that person has completely disrupted that segment of the legal environment. And like they're a creator, like they're making, and so if you're a CMO, that's actually happening to you, right? So like in the world where you went out and, said, hey, I'll go do, let's just say, hey, I'll use Jimmy as an example. Hey, I'm going to buy a candy integration in Q1. And then someone goes, I'll buy a candy integration in Q3. And then someone goes, I'll buy a candy integration in Q4. The way if you're a creator, you look at that and like, well, that's nice, but basically this is a transaction. And the one thing I learned is exactly how your audience works, exactly what they want. I have a direct relationship with them. So now you trained me to go partner with someone and build a challenger brand. So for most CMOs, they will be facing over the next 5-10 years, multiple challenger brands powered by creators. And in most cases, they will basically probably be the brand that in sort of commoditizing the creator gave them the knowledge to know how to defeat them. Versus if I would say, if in Jimmy's early days, Hershey's had stepped in and say, look, we're going to do a $4 million annual deal with you. And it's going to, blah, 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 blah. The chances we'd been looking around to do a candy bar would have been probably low because they were like, well, do I risk like, $3 million of capital this year for something that's $12 million of known revenue? Probably not.
Yeah.
So I think that also is starting to tick up in the thing when you're looking at the impact that a creator can have. And by the way, even if you look at things like Prime, which is a home run and then sort of was crashing, but still did immeasurable damage to the sports drink space, right? And now they have a competitor. They did even a competitor that's currently struggling a little bit. It's still a competitor they did not have.
Yeah, kind of those days of here's the business, here's the creator, and they're in those separate channels are starting to dwindle. It's starting to become more and more combined, and it's really cool to see that you guys are having those conversations with the CMOs that are wanting to take things beyond just the standard integration. I think that is becoming just not sustainable for either side, right? For the creator side, but then also for the brand side. When you have those conversations, Sean, with the CMOs, what is usually their biggest hesitation or just friction point, or maybe the thing that they're just trying to kind of sort out on their end as they have to report up to their board?
I think the hard part for CMOs, right? It's like, there's a statistic people quote all the time that, the lifespan of a CMO averages about 18 months. And so this puts a pretty disincentive to take swings. And so the challenge is that the marketing infrastructure, no matter how amazing you are as a CMO, is sort of rather calcified. It wasn't that long ago that people talked about like buying digital as like a terrible thing, like a bad idea, right? Like we're talking like a decade. It's not that long ago. It's this overnight sensation that YouTube is now the most dominant player in video because they took over TV as a percentage of viewer. That overnight sensation was 20 years in the making and was true a decade ago, right? So the challenge is that even if you want to take big swings, sort of the structure sort of, by the way, I'm not even saying these are big swings, but it's hard to do things that are not the way they are always, right? Because like, when you think about like I tell people all the time, is like, you can have a genius idea with a CMO. And then it gets but the thing is, the way that marketing infrastructure is, all of it gets broken into kind of in the factory into component pieces. So like, hey, I want to do a big creator deal with someone like the scale of Dhar. You're really talking about a television deal and a branded content deal and an influencer deal of sorts and a programmatic deal, right? Those are all separate groups. And by the way, by the time you get to like let's say the woman who's the 25-year-old who does the programmatic buying for Pepsi brands, I guarantee you she's like 10 times smarter than me or any of the people interacting with her in terms of how digital uses and savviness. But her incentive plan is like, get the cheapest possible programmatic purchase possible for me, the media company, so that I can make margin and try. So she's not incentivized to be like, oh, I have to think about the fact, like, how does this deal work across like the integration team? Like, and so it's a structural problem often, a structural problem, which makes it hard for the CMO's vision and the creator's vision, which is why I sort of think you got to get either the holdco level conversations where we're having, or you got to get direct to the CMO to sort of have someone be like, okay. The next thing is like, the challenge for that is a bit of a chicken and an egg problem. To do what you want to do, it's a big purchase price, but they're used to a world where they can kind of crawl, walk, run. So it's like, oh, well, I think this is a great idea, but what I want to do is start by doing like one $50,000 integration, and you get back to square one again. You're like,
exactly.
Right. And so you get to the same problem. Like, you have and so you have these weird perverse incentives that kind of sort of get in the way. And so what'll happen, is often happens with any change in marketing, is a few CMOs will do some things that'll be innovative. A couple of them will work at first that will bring, and then it's just sort of, and then we'll see an article 3-4 years from now about the overnight success that was that thing. And we're like, no, the first one was done in like 2025. And that's sort of how it plays out. It can be frustrating for both sides of the equation because that's how it always works, but that's generally how it always works.
How do you guys think about, there's more and more creators taking equity and percentages of companies and really kind of avoiding the, hey, let's start with the 50,000, then work up to 100 and then $1 million, that sometimes is a challenge. As you mentioned, they're taking percentage of equity for the long haul. How do you guys think about that? Have you been approached by companies in the past, and what's your kind of long-term vision of something like that?
Like I said, I think that's sort of where it's going, right? I think at the end of the day, to your exact point, if I'm sitting around and someone's like, hey, I got a brand business, just for sake of argument, that's like worth $1 million, and I have to piecemeal it together by doing, $20,000-$50,000 deals, and someone walks in the door and says, hey, I'm not going to really pay you, but I'm going to give you equity. I'm going to give you 30% of this company. It's already profitable. And you just have to do sort of, content that's relevant to this. It's a hard conversation to ignore, right? Because you're like, well, even if this bombs, we still probably make more money in the long run. Even if I do sit down with our CFO and be like, let's do the time value. Like, you still be like, this still pencils out to like more value. So the challenge for that, I think, between the creator and brand is finding the right fit.
Yeah.
Just because you're big doesn't mean every product works for you. And so, you have to sort of think of mix and match for that kind of stuff, right? Like Ryan is a good example of
great example
of a great example. But the thing is, for Ryan, right, I suspect, I don't know his audience, but I suspect it's a younger, audience. And so a product that's available in retail, relatively easily available at a low price point, that is something that audience already consumes, great fit, right? But if like Ryan did 529s, probably not going to work.
No.
You have to sort of match, right? Like you can, and I know this from my days of running large consumer products businesses, giant reach does not mean conversion. It helps, but it's a consideration set. It's like, passion is a tougher metric, but that's the most important one. That's why you'll see creators who might have I have like 1 million views on my YouTube channel. They might have a $10 million business moving digital product because the product market fit to that specific thing is so on target. Or you could have a huge creator that might have 20 million views an episode, and they can't convert a product, not because they can't convert, but it's not the right fit for that audience. And you're like, oh, I'm trying to convert an audience that might really be 10-year-olds who don't have a credit card to go ask mom and dad to, do timeshares. It's not going to happen. versus, oh, like if you think of like classic kids TV, well, they're just pounding toys and fast food, right? Because that's stuff kids can harass their parents for, because there is a need. A parent does have to buy toys for you at some point. A parent does need to feed you at some point, right? But they're not pounding a kid's site for financial products or moving automotives or beauty products, right? So you got to find the right fit for the right audience.
Totally. And the finding of the fit, I think, is a great point of, are you more of like a Dhar or a Jimmy, or, really high scale, really high reach? Or are you kind of in that maybe a little bit smaller, couple 100,000 on YouTube, but super niche, super high pain point? There's a creator, Dr. Becky Kennedy. She's not on YouTube, she's more on Instagram, but has become really the go-to platform for parenting and parenting toddlers, parenting teenagers, and just trying to really educate parents on that. She's got a membership. While she doesn't do millions and millions of views, every single week or month, she's got from what I can tell, a pretty solid, maybe $5 to $10 million, business on her membership side of things. And so that, I think, is a great point. And Ali Abdal and his team have talked about not waiting. If you're one of those people that is not going to be, huge reach, in huge volume, starting to develop products early on, starting to develop those revenue streams, because waiting years and years and years to get to that might not be, sustainable path for you, you as the creator. So thinking about those product revenue streams is really key.
That's right. That's right.
And I think Ryan is, just back to him, Ryan Tran, the candy company that he's a part of now, was originally, he didn't start it himself. He essentially joined it with the co-founder, and obviously it's positioned and marketed like he started a candy company. Great. But I think there's a ton to learn from him. And I think he's really the new standard of, all right, I'm going to give equity to this person and I want it to look like X. Ryan is X. I mean, as far as what he's done to go all in, I'm keep blanking on the name of the candy brand. Joyride. Thank you. That is really, his content is so dominant on that, but in a really genuine way that isn't brand deal-esque or, ad read-esque. It's become part of him. And so that, as I've talked to other people who are trying to, they're founders of tech companies or CPG companies who are trying to do deals like that, they're so nuanced and there's so many levels to it. And a lot of them are coming back to saying, hey, I'm going to give you this much equity, I want what Ryan is doing. I want you as the creator to be doing that. And they're challenging, but I definitely think there's going to be more deals like that to come.
Yeah, I think so. Like there's good and bad in what Ryan's done. It's a public success that people could look at the metrics, say, how many videos did you do? What kind of views? Like, the challenge with that is, like, you can assign those metrics, but that's Ryan's engagement with Ryan's audience. It might not be the same of what, Mark Rober's engagement with Mark's audience is, or like those are, so if you just send someone a template and say, I'm going to do exactly what Ryan Trahan did, then you better have exactly the same product, and that creator should be exactly the same person as Ryan Trahan, which is not true, right? There's one Ryan Trahan, right? So, that's a little bit of the danger when you see those deals. Is I get, and it makes a lot of sense from a business conversation, how you would use that as a template, but you've got to figure out how to have enough flexibility in that, because then you can accidentally hurt your brand, because if that other creator's, I'll make an extreme example, way to be more successful is actually to do on the nose call outs for your brand. Why would you not want that, right? Or if their way to be successful wasn't volume, but was like deep content on that thing, then why wouldn't you want them to do that? So you be careful that you'd be like, oh, well, the only way this works is if you do 1 billion impressions of these you might be forcing them to do something that doesn't resonate with their audience, and you don't get the end result. So it's good on the one hand, but a template. It's bad, and that generally some of those templates can become a straitjacket, and then you can accidentally screw up a good opportunity.
Yeah, you don't want to copy and paste. You figure out what works, but it's a good template, as you're saying. Sean, I want to switch to talking about some of the systems and processes, some of the nitty gritty behind the scenes of running the studio. The big thing that I'm always curious about and that we talked about in the pre-interview was how you guys have historically viewed costs and how you think about managing those costs at scale. Right now, you've got a 100,000 square foot studio. How do you approach just the financial side of the studio long term?
So before we get into any new year, we sit down and we build out a plan of what we think is going to happen. what we want to do, what we want to achieve. And then we build a budget against the goals of growth that we want to achieve for the company. And then as we run the business on a monthly basis, we sit down and have a monthly business review. We sit down and look at those financials and what's trading off and like, oh, is our production cost running hotter than we thought? Was that because we estimated wrong? Was that an issue? Are we making an investment we didn't expect? So you're always looking at both the big picture. Is the ship headed in the direction we want to? And then you're looking at the minutia of like, what are the specific levers that are causing me challenges or not challenges? And then you basically set up a cycle by which on a regular basis you go and review that. In fact, we're sort of at the mid-year point. So like, Dhar and Ruben and I were sitting down just yesterday, sort of going through another exercise where I was like, okay, what's all the top of mind initiatives we say we want to do? Because, one of the wonderful things about being in a small company with great, founders is that you don't lack for ideas.
Yeah.
Right. And as I always remind my teams, and I said, because I am one of those people who has 1,000 ideas as well, I said, look, every great company fails because of focus. Like what is the first thing, Steve Jobs, greatest, for a lot of these people, the greatest CEO, what's the first thing he did when he took over Apple? He killed 90% of what they were doing. I said, by the way, that was a company that's making like $1 billion a quarter, right? Which as much I'd like to think we are not, right? And so it is really sort of a bit of process. And one of the things Dhar talks about that makes Dhar a bit different is that Dhar doesn't think creative without thinking process. He's always thinking about like, how do I do, and not to the detriment, like we will come up with an idea, it will be 3.4 words. That's not, but like, hey, if you want to do scripted at scale, you got to start thinking early how to do it or you'll build the wrong systems. And so this is sort of the same way we think about the financial side of the business. Like at least say, here's the framework we're trying to operate for. Go check against it on a regular basis. And then, by the way, the thing I can guarantee you, there will be things you assumed that were wrong to the good side, things you assumed that are wrong to the wrong side. There will be, particularly as any business scales, you will never have a moment that every single thing is working perfectly. All the employees are happy and HR is working and I have no turnover and there's no competition issues. And it just doesn't happen. Particularly, I tell Dhar this all the time, like we have so many lines of business that unfortunately, if we have a day where everything is in the green, it's probably the day like we could be like, something's really, really wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Should be super suspicious. And so like, then you just sit down and you sort of re-level set and you have conversations that are like, hey, do we want to do X or Y based on our confidence on the risk return on doing that? And by the way, there's more complicated ways to do it. If you're in a large corporation, you have planning cycle, la, 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 la. But, for us, it's basically having the conversation like, okay, well, there's 20 things we want to do. What do we think it's going to cost to invest it? What do we think the return is going to be? How risky is that decision? Okay, now let's relook at the matrix. All right, well, like the exercise we did, I said, okay, we can do every single idea we want and we'd still be profitable, but like we would eat 60% of our cash flow. Do we want to do that? And so that's the way you have to think about it. And I'd say there's some measure when you do that you should be taking some risk that makes you uncomfortable. And some things you're like, yeah, that's a home run. Like there's no way where that's going to miss. By the way, there's no such thing as it's never going to miss, but like as you sort of look through, you're like, I think the risk return is on this. Because I always tell the team is like, if you don't fail 20% of the time, you are not trying hard enough. Your goal is not to actually always be right. Your goal is to be mostly right.
Do you guys have a framework that you use once you've established, all right, here's the ideas, here's some of the goals that we want to hit? Do you guys use, whether it's OKRs or a certain system to keep track of those and then check in on those goals on a monthly, weekly basis?
We do. So we have like literally daily So we have a dashboarding system that our data team cranks out that says, every single day how we're performing against what our goals and rolling averages are that we track literally on a daily basis. We have a financial review meeting every week where we go over against the metrics we're doing. And then we have larger strategic initiatives that we call kind of the big areas of focus. So like every other month, I get up in front of the team and I remind them, this is our mission. This is why we're all here. This is what our number one thing by what we judge everything by, right? Like put positive good into the world. That's every decision is guided by that. Then where we focus this over for the year, we go over our 3 big initiatives. And then we talk for the quarter. What is the quarter? What are we doing and how are we doing against it? It can get much, much more complicated than that. Someday we'll get there. It's not like I haven't run very, very complicated OKR, but like we're just not there, right? It's too much overhead for a small company. And one of the challenges of OKRs, and by the way, I'm a pro OKR person, is that in a culture that's not used to them or hasn't been done do them historically, they can have some accidental behaviors. And what I mean by that is like, I'm one of those people who believes you can't fix it if you can't measure it, right? You don't know what's going on if you can't measure it. That is true. But also, how do you keep the team, when you do OKRs, focused on the big vision, which is harder to measure, right? Because there's a challenge in doing OKRs between what you ultimately want to do, OKRs or metrics or whatever the team's doing, is have them down at the level that matter to the person who's at the most basic level, right? So like saying to a factory worker, let's say we're running a Ford factory line, like, hey, your OKR is top line revenue growth. They're like, I put screws in Ford F-150 doors. Right. So in theory, the OKR for that person is you go like, what drives top down revenue growth? Velocity of cars sold. So what would that mean to a factory? Velocity of cars made. Okay. So the OKR for the screw person is if we hit our goals, 100% rate, 100 trucks come off a day. So I'm going to set an OKR at 120 trucks because that will drive revenue. So your OKR is, and you have to do 4,000 screws a day. So you need to do 4,800 screws a day. That's your OKR. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that means then that screw person, no matter what happens, only cares about 4,800 screws. And so if the truck rolls in front of them and it's like missing a tire, who cares? My OKR is 4,800 screws. So there's a bit of a art to trying to figure out how to solve that problem. And I can tell you, as someone who's been trying to solve it for 25 years, I don't know if it's solvable.
So right? Challenging.
Because you're trying to figure out like, how much do I need to incentivize Thomas to do this versus that keeps mind share? And you can get into these complicated places where all of a sudden, like, Thomas has got 18 OKRs. And the thing is, like, well, 18 OKRs, it means that basically 5% of any of them impact my life. I could ignore a lot of 5%, right? At the same time, if you say your OKRs are things that you really don't have impact, and you feel passive. So that's the challenge. And then when you move OKRs into a creative environment, it can be daunting because, like, let's say you're having, particularly if you do content, you will have windows where it's just not working. And so then your team every morning wakes up and it's like a giant red dashboard. And it can be very disheartening for creatives to see that. Yet at the same time, if you want to treat them like adults, like, do you just never tell them? Like, so it's like a very complicated culture issue of what is, and I am a transparency guy. So it's an interesting thing in cultures that what amount of OKRs do you share? What do you set? And then how do they work, not work? And that's like literally a 3-hour podcast we could talk about.
Seriously.
For that.
The amount of nuances there. And just for reference, OKRs, objective and key result, is just a way to set goals for those who don't know. But the nuance of coming in, especially where you came from, Discovery, MTV, HBO, really big established media companies, and then coming into a company that more of a startup, but still in a really great spot, very, established, especially in the space that they're in, but still trying to get from duct tape to how do we put a little bit of gum and, some other things. You can't, like you said, you can't put Amazon level efficiency and Amazon level OKR systems into a company like that because you will kill the culture so fast.
That's right. So it's like, what amount of measurement's helpful at what amount of time? And I always tell teams, like, part of what you do on almost a quarterly basis, for example, is like kill meetings. Like, do we really need this anymore? And so there is no answer that anyone's perfectly solved it. Like, for example, I have a ton of friends who work at Amazon, right? That's supposed to be like the most efficient, well optimized. And people write all the time about, how Andy Jasny's trying to get rid of like the middle layer of management. My hypothesis is he's not trying to get rid of the middle layer of management because they're not valuable people. I think he's trying to get rid of it because when you have, I don't know what the number is, let's call it 200,000 employees, the infrastructure to manage it becomes so bureaucratic, not because anyone's doing anything wrong, but all of a sudden you get to things where people are like, well, I can't have that meeting on Wednesday because on this document it says if we don't have the printers full of paper, we can't have meetings. You're like, that makes no sense. Yeah, but that's my OKR, right? And so part of my hypothesis is like he's probably doing what a lot of CEOs do when they realize there's too much bureaucracy or it's slowed down the organization, is they sort of try and intentionally introduce something into the system to shake it up. And my suspicion is he's like, well, if I have less people that have to approve, maybe we move faster. By the way, I don't know if it'll work, but like it sort of shows that even at the most efficient organization, like when I was at Bertelsmann, for example, we had a year where they basically was like a year of like red tape killing. You could elevate all the way to the CEO, anything like, I literally don't know why we do this. And they went around and killed a bunch of initiatives, right? And like did things like, and sometimes it was even simple. It's like, did you know that I'm a CEO of a division and I can't approve any expense over 500 euros? He's like, wait, what? So like, he's like, it's 5 million. Like he just moved, like, they did things to sort of move bureaucracy out, but like, and that's an organization that's 200 years old, right? So like, it's
so challenging.
Even at the big organization, so just like it is at a small organization.
But especially the small organizations, Ali Abdal and his team, back to them, they are really good at ruthless prioritization, and they are just really good at saying, what is the ladder leaned up against, and if I get to the top, is that actually where I want to be at? And that kind of structure is challenging because there's a lot of shiny object syndrome, and I've experienced it in early stage startups on the tech side and the software side. And it's the same thing, right? Shiny object syndrome has no boundaries. It's everywhere. And even with creators, it's the same thing. And there are just so many nuances. What advice do you have for CEOs and COOs that are coming into creator businesses, Sean, and they are trying to figure out those nuances? What maybe mistakes would you encourage them to avoid, especially early on?
Again, my first thing would be trying to make too many decisions in the culture too fast, which is hard because that's sort of why you're there. I think the second thing I would say is you should have a process by which you regularly come back, because for sure, shiny object syndrome is for sure going to happen. And part of it is good and part of it's bad. And part of your job is to sort of let it go to a certain point, and then when do you reel it back in? So almost like sit down with the CEO and say, hey, this is the process by which when I think we're going off the rails, we can sit down and talk about it, and we can debate it. And you can say, I don't agree and I still want to do that shiny object. That's totally fine. But this is like, this process by which I'm going to do those signals to be like, that was me doing it like this week. Like, hey, we got 20 shiny objects. They're actually all correct. So I'm not even going to say they're wrong, but we just cannot do all of them. What are we going to do? Right. And it's not like in the first meeting we solved it, just started the conversation. So there's an awareness. So like, the next day someone's like, I have an idea. They're like, we don't have room for it. Right. And you just have to do some of that stuff. Like, one of the hard things about being a CEO or a COO or coming in any organization, it's not even just creators, is that your job at some point oddly becomes very repetitive, because you intentionally hire smart people. You're surrounded by smart people. But it turns out that you need to repeat the thing that you're repeating, not like once, not like twice, like hundreds. And hundreds of times, to a point where you start to kind of question your own sanity, and the people around you are like, didn't I just yesterday do? And the best example I have of this is like, I was running a CEO of a company, and for a year I started every all hands with sort of the vision statement. And then a year passed and we were doing sort of a new kickoff a new year. And so I didn't start with the vision statement. I just started like, okay, we did a lot of great stuff. We had an all hands like in December. This is like the January one. And there's all the things we want to tackle. Here's where our priorities are. Let's go get them. Here's our key OKRs and where the measurements are going to be. And I always ask for feedback. I'm like, okay, what did I screw up? What worked well on the all hands? And the all hands came back. Like the most frequent feedback was like, the team is super confused. They no longer know what our strategy is. I was like, wait, they don't know what the strategy is. And the simple thing that they didn't know the strategy was that I did not show the slide I had shown every month. So they thought I changed it. I changed nothing. And I was like, and so it's hard. It's one of those things that I imagine, like if you're a politician, right? Like people think, oh, the politicians, their speech was great. You realize it's the stump speech they've probably done 2,000 times, right? And so, for a leader, it's hard because you're like, okay, I've told everybody this is what we're doing. Everybody knows what we're doing. And you realize you just never stop saying this is what we're doing, which is why like now I don't ever start with the mission. And here's the green we're doing this year. every time. And so like, I think that's part to keep the focus in the organization is just know. It's a little bit like I told this to Dhar once. I said, it's a little bit like people who are healthy physically, who exercise pretty regularly. Your perception is that they've never fallen off the wagon and they get up rain, snow, or shine. No, the difference is for somebody who is relatively healthy is that they get sick just like everybody else. They go on vacations. They have times where like they injure themselves, they don't work out. Is that they don't beat themselves up so bad that they don't get back up. They go, oh, just got to get back on. And that's sort of the way you have to treat focus, is like you will 100% lose focus regularly. So don't beat yourself up. Just know that it's an is, like we will lose focus. My job is to always catch us before we go too far awry and get us back on and be like, this is where we're focused. So that's it's not a very exciting way to do it, but that is
the truth. I've got a couple rapid fire questions here, Sean, as we wrap up. They don't have to be rapid fire answers, but the questions I've got here is, what creator businesses or what creators do you really admire, and even take bits of information and just apply it to your own business right now?
It's funny. I would say there's no creator that we don't look at, small or big, that's doing something interesting. We don't say, what can we learn from that? What the magic or difficulty is that we often say like, okay, well, but what is our version of that? We can't necessarily do that. Like just yesterday, we were having a conversation with Jordan Matter, who's a good friend of the firm. We think highly of. He's even a client of our agency. And we were talking about like, ideas he had for our channel and things we should do to kind of, kick in a next stage of growth. And, the conversation was like, even for him, he's like, well, you probably can't do that because you're not quite me, right? Like, and so, we were having a conversation with a creator who does kind of plays in exactly our same space. And, do we try as an experiment that thing that they do, which is not something that we do? So we generally try and keep a very beginner's mind on most things. Like, hey, we should never be so arrogant as to assume we're the best. We should actually be so humble to be like, we actually have some expertise, but what else can we always be in an active learning mode? And particularly that's important in the creator space because you have burnout issues that can happen, less of a risk for us because we don't have one talent dependency. But you have, content burnout. Like you can, if you look at most creators, it's not like everything they do works forever, right? They generally have to reinvent and do their stuff. And that's part of the conversation we're having with Jordan. Like he's a great example. Like Jordan Matter's original content was this unbelievably luxurious photography stuff. Today he's one of the biggest like family creators. He basically does a sitcom. Right, like it's a huge move, but like it was a conversation like how that move happened over time, because or if you look at say someone like Jimmy, if you look at his genres, they're significantly different over time. Like he started doing the famous TV format Queen for the Day, right? Like surprising people and making their dreams come true. That was the original format that broke Jimmy out. Actually, first it was like impossible stuff. I'm going to read the whole. And then it moved in. And then today, like, then he, for a while, he moved into the Lifestyles Rich and Famous format. Now he's doing like sort of discovery, big travels. Like he's just changing genres, but you learn from that. Like, okay, well, how it would be harder for us to do that because Jimmy's business is talent dependent. So they're following the talent. He still has to be thoughtful how he does it. Whereas if tomorrow on Dhar Mann, we just started making raunchy teen sitcoms, we blow the channel apart. Right? Like the audience will be like, what the hell just happened? So you learn from them, but you figure out what do I need to adapt and learn from that.
What's the biggest thing big media still doesn't understand about creators? And this, I feel like you're the perfect person to ask because you've been in big media for so long, but what's the biggest thing that they still don't understand?
I think it's two things specifically. One, there still is a giant sort of like creators are less than. Right? Because anything that is not the machine is looked at less than, right? So you'll see, even if you look at my LinkedIn, you'll be people like, well, that's fine because that's just UGC, which makes no sense. Like it's not, right? Or, that's crap content. By the way, this is, and I don't take it personally because I've been in all the crap areas of my career where they always say that. And like, now only cable wins Emmys, right? It was the crap, right? So that's sort of normative, but that's the first thing. It's like, they're not true auteurs or the kind of words they throw around. The second issue is that they're trying to use the framework of traditional media they're trying to make creators be them versus them be creators. And so the challenge is like, for example, someone called me the other day and they're like, oh, we're gonna, directors and TV people who are losing their roles are just going to go to YouTube. And I'm like, I hope that's true. I said, but you do realize you're signing up for like a 3-year experiment.
At least.
Right? Like You're committing, like, I'm going to try for 3 years and then I might have some signal. And so there's no equivalent to that in the TV world, or at least one where, like, I might not get paid, right? Because in the TV world, there's no sort of equity risk, right? It's a job, for lack of a better description. And so I think the thought process of becoming a creator is true and not true at the same time, right? You still have to have creative chops. You still have to have audience understanding. You have to have a passion and a vision you want to share. All those are uniformly true, no matter what medium we're talking about, whether you want to be a painter, a rapper, or like a creator or a television writer. But the economic incentives and how it works are vastly different. And that's, I think, the hard thing for it to understand. It's like Stephen Colbert, who's an unbelievable talent. If he went to YouTube tomorrow, he's still starting at page 1, like all of us are.
It's a great point.
Like, whereas if he started tomorrow in like in a linear thing, there's a built-in audience that's sitting there, right, that he has some advantage on. So I think that's just the thing that they're still trying to come to understand better.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Creator Ops Podcast. If you're interested in chatting more about the creator economy, send me a message on LinkedIn or email me at thomas@creatoropsmedia.com.